If you were asked about whether you wanted to have a red crown because one day you would be martyred, or a white crown because one day you'd be very pure, which would you take? That was the question that the Virgin Mary asked a very young Max Kolbe. Max Kolbe was raised in Poland to a very poor family, and he decided that he was going to sacrifice his life for the Blessed Virgin Mother, and also for her intercession to Jesus. And so he lived his life in a very beautiful way. And I'm going to recount this, and much of what I'm drawing from is coming from this book right here. It's by Elaine Murray Stone, and it's called Maximilian Kolbe, Saint of Auschwitz. So you probably have an idea of how his life came to an end. But I'm going to go through some interesting details in his life because I think it's very good for us to read about the saints, because the saints have lived exemplary lives. We can strive to be like saints. In Corinthians, Paul told us that we should strive to be like saints. Saints are people who are recognized for their good deeds and belief in Jesus Christ. And many of them sacrificed their lives for Jesus Christ. In fact, I had heard that some of the Coptic Christians in Egypt who had been beheaded, also because they sacrificed their lives, have been deemed saints. So who is Max Kolbe? Well, you might not know this, but he had four brothers. He had one older brother and three younger brothers. And he lived to a very poor family in Poland. And his parents were Julius and Maria Kolbe. Okay. And he grew up in this very poor household. And so that was how it all started out. He lost two of his brothers when they were very young. So two of his brothers died before the age of 10. And another one of his brothers ended up dying also under the Nazis in a prison camp. So another one of his brothers went that way. And then the other one of his brothers, another one of his brothers was able to live on. Now, Max became a Catholic priest. And he went into the vocation because he wanted to make a big difference, and he did. So in Poland, he ended up building a big city, the city of Mary. He brought in a whole bunch of other monks. He had a radio show, and he would write things. He had a newspaper. He did a lot of different things to try to bring the good news to people. And he was doing this all during a very treacherous time. He lived during World War I and World War II. And so you can only imagine living in those period of time. And everything he did was in a very humble way. That was one thing about Max. And so here's what it says about the vision. And this is what happened when Max was little. And I'm quoting right from the book here. I'm quoting on page 7. It says, Raymond, that was his original name, seemed embarrassed to reveal his secret. But finally, shaking with emotion, he obeyed his mother and told her, one day, when I was praying before the painting of Our Lady of Częstochowa in church, he began softly, Our Lady appeared to me. And now this is his mother. Maria's broad face looked shocked. Could this be true, or was her son being sacrilegious? Even worse, perhaps he was going crazy. But she nodded for Raymond to continue. Our Lady was holding out two crowns. One was white, the other red. She gazed at me lovingly and said, which of these crowns do you desire? Then the Virgin told me that if I chose the white crown, I would remain pure for life. The red crown was a martyr's crown. I thought about it for a while. Then I told her, I want both of them. The Virgin smiled sweetly at me, and then she disappeared. And so that's what he said. And that apparently really transformed him. And his mother believed him after a while because she realized what a different boy he was before and after this particular event happened in his life. So he went on to study. He has a PhD in theology and a PhD in philosophy, and he went on to become a Catholic priest. As I said, he built this tremendous city in Poland, and many people came to it. He started a lot of, because he was running a news service and he was getting the word out, the good news out, he attracted a lot of attention, and people realized, hey, monks can live pretty well. They can live in pretty fun ways. Friars are doing a good job. It's a good deal. So he attracted a lot of people. And eventually, you might not know this part, he went over to Japan. He went to Nagasaki in Japan. Now, you probably know that Hiroshima and Nagasaki were the two cities that had been bombed by the atomic bomb in World War II. Well, Max decided to build his church and his area, his place for other people like him, Catholic priests, to come and to practice their beliefs, and also to put out his newspaper. He wanted to put it out in Japanese, which was a challenge, but God answered his challenge and figured out a way that he could present his paper in Japanese. So he was able to produce news in Japanese. He tried in India, but that didn't work out so well, so he returned to Japan. Now, interestingly, where he located this place, where he located his place where they were praying and his friary, was on a hill that apparently a lot of other people had been martyred hundreds of years before for converting too many Buddhists. So he put his place on the other side of a hill. When Nagasaki was bombed, one of the only places to be spared was Max's, which is considered a miracle in and of itself. So the friary, the world's largest friary. So this was what you can hear about what happened back in Poland. So the doctor would have been shocked to see how much work the ill friar did every day. See, Max had developed tuberculosis, and so he struggled with that through his life. Many of the saints many times develop these terrible diseases, and they're still able to pursue and persevere, and Max was no different. We remember that happened with Bernadette at Lourdes. She also, she was able to cure many people, and you have other saints who've been able to cure people. Many times they themselves suffer. And so it says, there was no stopping him or the growth of the city of Mary. Men came daily to the gate asking to be admitted to the order. By 1937, Niepokalano, which is another name, the Polish name for the city of Mary, had become the largest friary in the world. As many as 700 men lived and worked there. And the Knight, that's the name of his news publication, reached a circulation of 750,000. Other papers and magazines were printed at Nibakalo too. Some were for children, others for youths. There was even a section on sports. The place had become so large that the friars published a weekly paper, the Echo, Niepokalano, just for themselves. Everywhere in Marytown, the air was filled with this acrid smell of printer's ink and the whir of presses running day and night. And so you can see what he was doing. He was running a business out of here. And so he went to Japan, as I mentioned before. He built a place called the Garden of Mary, and that was, again, built in a place where many people had been martyred before for converting others to Christianity. And eventually, the Nazis got wind of him, and it wasn't a very good deal. So the Nazis knew that he was being successful. He was very anti-Nazi. He was very vocal about his beliefs, about the terrible things that the Nazis were doing. People were well aware of what the Nazis were doing and the way that they were shipping Jewish people off to the death camps. They were gunning them down in the streets. It was really horrific. Now, in case you don't know this, much of this had been predicted by Mother Mary in her apparition at Fatima. So when Mother Mary appeared to the three children at Fatima, she warned them that if people didn't correct their ways, people didn't repent and come back, there would be another great war, and there would be a sign in the heavens just prior to the war. Well, there was a tremendous aurora borealis that appeared that you could see all throughout Europe and even into the Americas. So you could see this in the Northern Hemisphere. And it appeared in 1938, just prior to when Hitler marched into Austria and the war began. So that was something that Mary predicted because people hadn't corrected their ways and Russia hadn't been consecrated to her Immaculate Heart. So anyway, the Nazis were something that Max abhorred, their principles. But the interesting thing was his entire life, he prayed for his captors. He prayed for people who were in other faiths. He said prayers continuously while he was jailed at Auschwitz, which I'll get into in just a minute. But he was always praying for his enemies, and he was able to convert a lot of people to Christianity and Catholicism. He was able to convert Jewish people sometimes. He would go to the hospitals and say prayers with people, and they would convert. A lot of people would just look at him and the way he lived his life, and that would draw them to convert to Christianity. So he was making a huge difference, and he was doing his work in a very selfless way. So then what happened was the Nazis decided to arrest him, and they arrested him without him objecting. They just walked into this place in Poland and arrested him, telling him that he was basically an enemy And they had also been arresting a number of priests. A lot of people don't realize this, but if you were considered a Catholic priest, you were considered a strong voice in the community. They didn't want you around. They didn't want people they considered less than the Aryan race, but they also didn't want people who were Catholic priests who were very vocal. They didn't want the academics around. They didn't want anybody who would be speaking out against what they were doing. And so they were constantly searching for priests and people who were vocational. And so they came in there and they arrested Max and they brought him to Auschwitz. And the interesting thing about Auschwitz was it said something like work saves you at the door. It was really a horrible place. It was considered one of the worst death camps that you could possibly go to. And many, many, many people were killed there. And they were stripped of their clothes just before they were killed. Sometimes they were gunned down. But there was this little deal where if you escaped from Auschwitz, they would take other people who were in your area in the prison and round them up and randomly choose a certain number of them to kill them. And the first time somebody escaped in front of Max, they did that. They rounded up 10 people and they shot them on sight in front of everybody. And so that told other people, if I go to escape, 10 people will lose their life just because of me. But it happened again. Another person escaped and was ended up captured eventually, but he escaped. And so they rounded up a bunch of people. And as they were rounding up these people, in this place, it said, work begins freedom. That's what it says on the door at Auschwitz, which is pretty terrible. But as they were rounding up these people, they started rounding up 10 people because the person had escaped. And when they got to the last guy, his name was Francis Gajonazek. And you can see him pictured here. He's on the top left, and that's maybe how he looked during the Nazi war. And he was also on the top right. You can see he ended up living. Here's what he said. He was the 10th one picked. And he said, please, I have a wife and 2 children. I'll never see him again. He was in a complete panic. And as he looked back and reflected on it, he barely remembers the whole thing because of the torture and the mindset that he was in. And as he said that, Max realized this is Max's moment. He was going to step forward and offer to give his life, because there's no greater love than giving your life to save another, as Jesus said. And so he came forward and he said, I wish to make a request. And he was speaking in German. Max had learned a number of languages, very intelligent man. And the commandant who was picking these people, apparently he was very evil, demonic. He had a very demonic eyes, demonic way about him. He had he took certain pleasure in hurting people in such horrible ways. And so Max said, I wish to take this man's place. And he pointed towards the sobbing Francis. The priest, looking far older than his 47 years, explained, I have no family. I am old and sick. He can do more work. The commandant then asked him, well, who are you? And without blinking, Kolbe said, I am a Catholic priest. Standing silent for a few minutes, Commandant Fritsch stared at the strange prisoner who was willing to die for another. Request granted. So what did they do to these people? Instead of killing them on sight, they decided something that would be a little more torturous. So they took the 10 of them and they locked them into solitary confinement, into a cell. Actually, I shouldn't say it's solitary. I should say they locked them into a dark cell and decided that they were going to starve them to death. And so as they were doing this, Max is still saying prayers. The Nazis had outlawed saying prayers. If you were caught saying prayers, you're shot on sight. But he was still saying prayers. He was praying with people. He was blessing people. He was trying to help them up till every last moment in his life. And the others just started dying of starvation. And they didn't have any food, no water, anything. So the others started dying. And Max was one of the only ones left. And so they decided they would hasten the process. And they injected him with poison. And then he died. So what happened then was the interesting thing is with Francis. See the man again in the corner. He ended up making his way home to his family. But when he got there, his family wasn't there because his house had been bombed. So he went and looked around and finally found his wife, who is staying with her parents. And he found out his 2 children had died. And that's where it gets kind of sad. And so what he did was he made it his life's mission to go out. He made it his life's mission to go out and to share the word about Max Kolbe and who he was and what he did. And he had a lot of really good things to say. And I'm sorry getting choked up because I think of that part. I have 2 sons myself, so it gets you choked up. So Thank you, everybody, for coming in today. I just want to tell you a little bit about Max Kolbe. I'm going to be looking into other saints. If you have any saint recommendations you want to talk about, let me know. There are also a number of other miracles that I want to talk about. In fact, I just found a person who has a website called The Miracle Hunter. And this person has been running this website for a while, and it's apparently a really tremendous website. It contains a whole bunch of miracles. One of the person's favorite miracles is one miracle with Padre Pio. Apparently, there was a girl who had a bladder. She had some horrible infections. She had to have her bladder removed, but somebody told her, "Why don't you go and see Padre Pio?" And so she contacted Padre Pio, who's another saint in Italy where he lived. He also lived in the last century. And she contacted him and he said, "You better come quickly." Well, he went. This girl went there, and this was in the 1960s. She went there and she was healed, and in fact, a bladder grew within her. Complete miracle. And so that was one of the miracles that was found by the Miracle Hunter. I'm going to be bringing up more miracles. So my next weeks through the summer, I'm going to try to talk a lot about miracles and saints. And if there's anything or anyone that you think that would be interesting to have on the channel, do let me know. I'm very interested in bringing them in. But today I wanted to highlight a really tremendous saint, Saint Max Kolbe, Maximilian Kolbe, and his works. He also has miracles associated with him. One of the things about saints that you can do is you can pray to saints to act as intercessors, to bring your message to Jesus. And some people who are Protestants might say, "No, you can't do that. You can't pray to the saints." Well, we know the saints are in heaven. So what do you think they're doing in heaven? Well, Revelation 5:8 tells us what they're doing in heaven. They're bringing our prayers to Jesus. So if you have a particular saint that you really enjoy, and you feel like that might be your patron saint, and maybe the story really resonates with you, or maybe the saint is the saint of a particular sort of healing. Like, for example, there could be a saint who is over for healing cancer or for healing something else. You can pray to those saints and to act as your intercessor. And we've seen examples in even recent times where some of these saints have done that. And some of the saints have helped people to be cured of various diseases. And so if you have a disease, you have a challenge, you have something tough going on in your life, be sure to pray, pray wholeheartedly, say the rosary. The rosary is very important. We saw that highlighted at Fatima. So that's one of the main things that I want to talk about. And I hope you have a good time today. So please like, subscribe, and come again. And just remember, whether you eat, drink, or whatever you do it all for the glory of God. Thank you. Bye-bye.